Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse. This is Season 2, Episode 19. Today is Sunday, May the 3rd, 2015. My name is Graham Perro. With me, as always, are Tyler Fitch and Melissa Daphne. Hit us up on Google+. We have the Q&A app running if you have any questions or comments. Also, Lax Podcast on Twitter. And we'll get to those at some point during the show if you're watching live. Lots to talk about. This is our final episode of the regular season because the regular season ended yesterday. The playoffs are finally set. We didn't know the last team until the last few minutes, actually, of the last game, so that was pretty exciting. Toronto has clinched first place in the East and first overall with their win over New England on Friday. And as I'm sure you know by now, Calgary defeated the Vancouver Stealth in the final game and grabbed that last playoff spot in the West. So that's it for the playoffs. The other spots we knew about beforehand. Other news to talk about. One thing, we were just talking about this before the show started. Game 2 of the Western Final was going to be on Wednesday, May the 20th. This will only be the second Wednesday game in the history of the NLL. The other one was back in '87. The Wednesday game with Philadelphia Wings and somebody, I don't remember who else. Obviously, the Rexall place was the Rexall Center, whatever it's called. Was booked for the weekend, the best that Edmonton could do, considering they have a bye in the first round. They're hosting Game 2 of the second round as the number 1 seed. The best they could do was the Wednesday night, so that's what they announced, and they got all kinds of flack for it. Whether they did or the league did, I don't know. Somebody decided, most likely Edmonton, but I don't know, that this was not a good idea. And so they gave up home floor advantage. So we now have Edmonton hosting Game 1 of the Western Final, and either Colorado or Calgary, whoever comes out this weekend, will host Game 2 and potentially the mini game in that series. So that's kind of unfortunate for the Rush, but as we saw last year in the 2 games plus a mini game series, the team that won Game 1 kind of had an advantage. So if the Rush have Game 1 at home rather than Game 2, that may not be all that bad for them. What else? So some records set in the league this year. This is the second year that we've had 18 games, so it's not surprising that some of these records that have been standing for a long time have now been broken because we have an extra couple of games. But a lot of these records were not broken last year, so that's kind of interesting. Sean Evans, obviously, was the one that everybody knows about. He blew the record away for most points in a season. Grant set that a couple years ago with 116. Sean Evans finished the season with 130. Rob Hellyer was on pace for around 130 as well before he got injured, so we might have had a couple up there. And we had a couple in the teens, and Mark Matthews ended up with 115 or 114, I can't remember which. And somebody else was right behind him. I should probably know who, but I don't remember now. That would be Ryan Benesh, of course, 113. And we had 3 more above 100. So all kinds of points scored this year. Assist record as well. Sean Evans and Josh Sanderson had 83. Garrett Billings set that record of 82 back in 2012. Loose balls record for Jay Thornbear beat Jeff Snyder's record of 245 by 1. That was a little, I don't want to say suspect because that's the way Jeff Snyder gets it, but when you win a face-off, a lot of the times you're awarded a loose ball on that as well. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that Thornbear's down in the corners digging out for the loose balls down there. He's getting most of them on the face-offs, which, depending on how you look at it, is kind of cheat in the system. But that's the way the system works, and that's the way the record was set initially. So good on Jay Thornbear for breaking it. And Thornbear broke a couple of others as well. Face-offs won. He now has 338, beating Bob Snyder's 319. And face-offs attempted, 513. beating Bob Snyder's 494. So 3 awards, or 3 records set for Jay Thornberry, not bad. On to the games of the week, and since I've been talking for a while, I'll let you guys discuss this game before I put in my thoughts, assuming you saw any of it. Toronto took out New England 10-7 on Friday night, and like I said, that was the game where they clinched first overall. Tyler, did you manage to see this one?
No, sorry, had to do my high school coaching, and we were on a road trip Friday, and I missed it. But the first picture I saw in the summary was Colin Doyle on the floor, so that was super exciting to know that he's returned. He's one of my all-time favorite stealth players, even though he's only there like 3 years. But he had a huge impression, and I'm happy that he's back in the lineup. Did you catch anything, Melissa, here?
Unfortunately, I did not. This one was only on NL Live, and so this one I did not. I have very little to add other than it's interesting how many penalties Mike McNamara got in the second quarter. I'm kind of curious what was going on there. So looks like it's back to you, Graham.
Back to me? Okay. I didn't think this was all that great a game, honestly. I think I tweeted during the game that from the score, it looks like it was a really good defensive game, and I didn't think it really was. I mean, the goalies were good. Neither was outstanding. The defenses were okay. I just thought the offenses both looked flat. The Rock had Colin Doyle back. They had Rob Hellyer back. I honestly didn't really notice Hellyer and all that much, probably because I was watching Doyle and just checking out what he was doing and how he was looking, and he looked as strong as ever. He looked like the old Colin Doyle. Now, this was also the second time in the last few years that Doyle has been out for several games and then has come back to see a struggling offense. And that's, I'm not trying to put any blame on Doyle, saying, he's the one that messed everything up. But they definitely played 17 games without him and kind of got used to each other, and this is the first time he's played with Kevin Crowley and Brett Hickey, for that matter. So they've kind of got used to each other, and then they throw Colin Doyle in, and it's not like he's the kind of guy who says, okay, now I'm the guy in charge, everything has to go through me now. He's been around long enough that I'm sure he's going to try to adapt to their system rather than having them adapt to the way he plays. But either way, it's going to throw a wrench into things. And so that seemed to happen more so in the first half. They seemed to kind of get it together in second half. And Doyle ended up with a couple of goals, including one on the power play and 3 assists. So he did okay. So Brett Hickey finished with 50 goals on the season. First Rock player ever to do that. That's pretty impressive. One thing that the color guy on the broadcast, I didn't catch his name, but one of the things he said about the Black Wolves, and now he's the Black Wolves guy, so I'm guessing he's seen most of their games this year, was he said nobody's setting picks for anybody else. Now he was talking at the point about soft picks versus hard picks, and I'm not entirely sure what the difference is there. But he said most of what they were doing was soft picks, and they were passing around a lot, but nobody was setting picks to get guys open, and that was their big problem. So yeah, I can't tell you exactly what the problem with the Rock offense was, but there was a lot of passing and not a lot of shooting. When they did shoot, it didn't seem like there seemed to be a lot of desperation shots, or I don't know what else to do with it, but I seem to kind of have a lane, so I may as well throw it at the net and see what happens. And if you do that here and there, sometimes you get lucky and it goes in. But if that's your strategy for the whole game, then you really got to work on that. So it wasn't a terribly impressive game. Considering New England ended up being the worst team in the league, you'd figure the number 1 overall seed should really have no trouble with them. But the Rock did win, but it wasn't in any way, shape, or form a dominating win. Unlike the Bandits, which I guess we'll get to next. Same New England team, different result. Well, I guess same result, but they scored a few extra goals, but they got blown out of this one. Buffalo beat New England 20-10 on Saturday night. I didn't see this one at all because the Rock game was on at the same time. Or sorry, not the Rock game. No, I'm getting confused here. The Rock game was Friday night. I didn't see this one because I was out seeing the Avengers movie, so I didn't get back until this one was already half over, and then I went on to the Edmonton Colorado game anyway. So did you guys see this one at all? Melissa, we'll start with you.
I did not see this one. I did, however, try. Universal's still having their game is live issue, so you can't watch it. So if you can actually get to the correct spot, you can't watch the game. So I was out of luck because this one was not unplayable. What about you, Tyler?
Yeah, I missed it. Because when I was coaching Friday, it was 3.5 hours from home, so this is when I was driving home after my Saturday game. But I seeing the stats and like 20 goals in a game where everything was kind of already decided, it gave Thornbear the chance to get that loose ball record by 1. I think that's the one he got by 1. But so I don't know if they weren't even running up the score because they only scored 2 goals in the fourth quarter, but they just poured it on to give Thornbear that chance to get that record, I think. And it's kind of cool in the sense if that's what's happening, that's the team rallying around that guy to get him that record as a reward for his hard work. That's, I think they said 2 straight games they put on 20 goals as a tweet I saw. It was the first time that's happened in a long while. Mitch Jones, another big game for Buffalo in news from former Stealth players. Let's see what he did. 4 goals. No assists, but 4 goals. He's finding his groove very quickly in with this team, which is impressive and helpful for them. Could be a game changer as they start playing next weekend. Other than that, I don't know, finished up a tough season for the first season for those New England Black Wolves. I saw, I guess, tweets or something like, hey, we're looking forward to next year and we'll be back and things like that, but I don't know. I don't put a ton of weight into those things. Everybody says that and then things change. Not that I've heard anything, it's just they didn't seem to like blow the doors off the place and be like, hey, look, we got a packed arena, everybody loves us. It's like, no, we're just doing fine. But I don't know, they're in the casino arena. I think there's probably a little overhead to actually do all the stuff, and I expect them to be back next year. What's your thoughts on this, Graham? Did you have any thoughts on it besides the fact that you didn't get to see it?
Not really, no. It does look like, well, just looking at the numbers, Banesh had 12 points, Dane Smith had 9. Both of them end up over 100 points on the season. I don't know if that's ever happened on the Bandits before. Tavares has been over 100 points, and I'm not sure if Stainhouse has ever passed 100. He ended up with 95 this year. But just looking at the numbers of that game and their game last week, actually their last 4 games they won, it looks like they certainly did not have the problem that we've seen from both the Stealth and the Roughnecks this year, in that they'd start off strong and then kind of take their foot off the gas and then let the other team come back. I think we're talking about the Edmonton Rush doing that as well. Buffalo does not do that. They put their foot on the gas. They just keep it on the gas. And if they're winning by 8, if they're winning by 10, well, then we'll just keep scoring. And then we win by 15 instead. Yeah, so, I mean, quite honestly, as a Rock fan, I'm glad we got first place and that we're not facing the Bandits in the first round, because granted their last 4 games were against non-playoff teams, and so but they scored 20 in 2 of them, 17 in another, held their opponents to 10 or less in all 4. So I mean, we talked about them peaking at the right time, and this is for sure the right time. They're going to go into the playoffs with a ton of confidence. And I know the Bandits have an over 500 record all-time in Toronto. So I'd be totally fine if they went into Rochester and got beat. Not that the Nighthawks will be an easy team to beat, but I'm kind of glad we're not facing the Bandits right now. Moving on to the next game, Rochester and Minnesota. I didn't see this one either. This one finished in OT, and look out, Minnesota beat the Nighthawks. That's crazy. And if you think that's crazy, who scored the overtime goal but Jason Noble? Not Jeremy. Jason with his first career goal, 10 minutes into overtime. So good job, Jason. It'll be something to brag to your brother about. I don't think he has any overtime goals this year. But I guess it's in his third season, his first goal. But I mean, he's one of these pure defenders who just doesn't see the other side of the floor all that often. So not too surprising, really. But yeah, I don't really have any other comments on this game. How about you guys?
You didn't pick Minnesota to win like I did?
No, actually, I did not.
Well, this one seemed like an obvious pick to me. How else was I going to try and catch up in our pick'em standings without picking the underdogs? I don't know. Not a good note for Rochester to finish in this way, but it was great for Minnesota to put this effort forth and basically, didn't matter to them, and it did matter to Rochester as they were battling. I guess it's already decided that. I guess maybe they would have got second if they had won this. They could have got second overall ahead of Edmonton. But Minnesota found a reason to come out and play for their fans, and they were going crazy when they scored that overtime goal. They're all super excited. And so it was very good effort by the Swarm at the end of a lackluster season. So it's pretty cool to see the team and coaches rally and make that happen. What do you think, Melissa?
I was surprised to see the result on this one. I wasn't able to watch this one, but I would not have expected this one to go to overtime and 10 minutes into overtime. I mean, that just seems really crazy. So it makes me wonder if Rochester just kind of underestimated Minnesota or just really didn't care. But at the same time, you look and it's like they had one goal in the second, one goal in the third. And so that does make you wonder, facing a team like Minnesota that really has struggled all season, if how much of that was Minnesota and how much of that was Rochester. So yeah, going into the playoffs, that might be a bigger sign of an issue, or it could be they really didn't care about taking second place and just really didn't put it all out there.
Yeah, that's certainly possible. They had nothing to play for at this point. They already knew. Now, like you said, I don't know if they had clinched second overall. They had certainly. They knew that they had second in the East because Toronto had clinched first the night before. But yeah, a Rochester win could have had other implications, but maybe they weren't too concerned with that. They put out some effort, but they didn't go all out, whereas Minnesota did. And like you said, Tyler, kudos to them for that. Yeah, so moving on to Edmonton, Colorado. I saw the first half of this game before I switched over to the Calgary-Vancouver game. And I didn't write anything down about it. Where I had it over here, didn't I? Ben McIntosh looked really good in this game, I thought, and Matthews as well. Now this is not surprising. This is not unusual. John Grant was nowhere to be found at all. He had 2 assists and no goals. In fact, I looked at his season-ending stats and noticed that he was 1 goal ahead of Gary Gait all time. And I thought, well, didn't that happen like 2 weeks ago? Has he not scored a goal since? No, he has not. He scored 0 goals in the last 2 Mammoth games. So that's a little surprising. This game was back and forth for the first half. Like I said, I didn't see the second half. But every time Edmonton would grab a lead, Colorado would be right back. They tied it up 3 times in the second. Edmonton just kept coming back. Edmonton kept coming back to take the lead. Colorado would tie it up again. So it looked like it was going to go right down to the wire. Didn't quite go down to the wire, but it was a pretty close game. Nobody had a lead of more than 3. So I don't have much more to say on this one. Melissa, did you see this one?
Yeah, this was one of the few games I was able to go to this season. Thanks, sucky schedule. Um, looking at like the first quarter, it really seems like it was a close game, but about midway through the first quarter, Mammoth had exactly 2 shots on goal. So even though they ended up scoring and they picked it up the second half of the first quarter, they looked horrible to begin with. They were sloppy. Like more of their passes were going to their opponent than their teammates. Some of them were actually intercepted by rush players. Some of them were thrown to rush players. So the fact that it only was a 3-goal game actually says a lot, because the way it started off, I was expecting a game more like the Buffalo New England score. It was not looking hopeful. It was an interesting game. It was very chippy. Edmonton was actually starting a lot of fights and just scuffles, which I don't remember seeing this out of Edmonton. So this was kind of interesting to see. It was just some of the different players on the team, but it just seemed like there was definitely more tension between these two teams than I can ever recall seeing. There was a few interesting calls, and unfortunately, being at the game, I actually don't know. And it sounds like the announcers really didn't announce it. There was one goal that was challenged, and the flag was thrown from the rush, and I think it was in the second quarter. But they ended up challenging 2 goals because the Mammoth scored as well. And obviously, if the first goal would have held, the second one would have been moot anyway. But when the ref made the announcement that both calls stood on the floor, he said that Edmonton actually challenged both goals, and so there was some confusion whether Edmonton was actually charged for both their challenges, or if somehow they were challenging 2 goals with 1 challenge flag. So that could have been very interesting if they would have wanted to challenge something later on. There were some really exciting saves. There were some really exciting goals. I'm expecting that we're going to probably see Bouquet start next week for whatever reason. Ward is playing well, but he's not playing great. So I don't know if the injury he suffered earlier this season actually is having a longer-term impact, or if he was just having a slightly off night, or if the defense was just falling down in front of him too much. It was definitely... The Mammoth looked like a team that had a bye week last week. So maybe next week they're going to play better, but they looked really rough for a lot of this game. It was very frustrating going into this close to the playoffs and watching these just dropped passes left and right. And really, I mean, they'd shoot on net and they're like 5 feet from the goals. Like they were nowhere near. It was like somebody messed with everybody's strings or something. So there was exciting points, but as a Mammoth fan, I was very frustrated watching my team because it's like you don't look like a playoff-bound team right now. And so going into a team that has knocked us out every year, practically, it did not look hopeful. Did you watch this one, Tyler?
No, I missed this one again because of my drive, but it was Edmonton's defense doing what they do. I mean, if they can shut down Grant now, I think they'll be confident in a few weeks if they see them again. It's a good tune-up for Edmonton to keep fresh because they have to have a bye week now. But kind of like Rochester for Colorado, you have a game next weekend and you got to bounce back from this effort instead of ride the tide of a great experience. So could be a little worried about Colorado in that sense, but not too worried. I think they're a good matchup with the Roughnecks going forward. How about you, Graham?
All right. We will move on to the final game of the weekend, the final game of the season, the regular season, of course. Calgary, Vancouver, which I guess is the game I know I've been looking forward to all week. So I have to start off with the NLL Live thing, which I've done numerous times this season. It seems like it's got better over the season. There were a number of problems with this whole NLL Live thing in the first couple of weeks, and all kinds of people were getting upset about it. And then they seem to kind of clean it up. I had trouble with it, and now maybe this was because I'm in Canada and it's supposed to be only available to people in the US, so maybe I'm cheating the system, but I paid for it. Um, but because I'm in Canada, it says, "Oh no, you need to use TSN Go." Well, my cable provider doesn't support TSN Go, though I've asked them for it. Apparently, they're working on it, but who knows how long that's going to take. They'll probably get it done like the day after the championship final or something. But anyway, so I can't use TSN Go. My only other option is then all live. So I put my work VPN up and running, and I work for an American company, so they think that I'm based in Philadelphia. And so they say, okay, you're in the US, you can do it. I log in and I can do it, and I can watch the games. Every now and again, the feed just stops, as if I had pressed pause. But nothing else happens. It never comes back again. The only way I found to clean that up is log off, log back on, start the feed again, and then it's fine. Sometimes it's fine for 10, 15 seconds, and I have to do it again, and that gets really irritating. Other times it lasts the rest of the game, and it's great. This time was okay. It happened a few times, but nothing major, until about the end of the third quarter, when it just got really choppy, and the video was moving, a few frames every few seconds, and ended up that the video was 10 to 30 seconds sometimes behind the audio. The audio was totally fine. It kept going. So at least I could listen to the game. But the feed got really choppy. I complained about it on Twitter, as I always do. And other people were saying the same thing. They were seeing it as well.
Yeah, I was going to mention your symptoms as we got into that late in the third quarter. And that's what I experienced as well, was the audio just keeps chugging along, but the video is completely jammed up and way behind the audio. And completely frustrating. David Takata, he's a former business person for the Stealth. He was getting the same experience, and so he was down in California. I was here, and you were, quote, in Philadelphia. And I think that it basically all the information there, since this is kind of the stuff I do for work, it says the problem is in Langley. I figure they have to run their video feed through some sort of computer and then pipe it out. And I've seen this happen in other Stealth games. Like as the game goes on longer, the file gets bigger and the computer gets maxed out, and so the audio goes fine, but that video takes so much processing power or whatever, it just gets stuck, and the audio is completely fine and completely infuriating. And then they went to the quarter break and they switched to the non-live feed, and the commercial was perfect. Came out of the quarter break in the fourth quarter, and like almost instantly the video tanked again, and it sucked.
That's exactly what I saw, and that continued for most of the fourth quarter. There were periods where something happened, and suddenly the video caught right up, and we were live again. We were in high def. Everything was just beautiful. And sometimes that lasted for 10 or 15 seconds. Other times it was a few minutes. But the whole fourth quarter was hit and miss. And I got to listen to most of it. And then at some point the feed stopped entirely. So I don't know if they just said, let's stop and just reboot the computer or something. Everything just stopped completely for 5 minutes. Then it came back up. Audio was great. Video was gone. And so I listened to the last few minutes, and then about 3 or 4 minutes in the game, everything stopped entirely. And so I got to basically watch the last 2 minutes of the last game of the most exciting game of the last few weeks on Twitter. And that's less than satisfying, honestly. So, yeah, so NLL crapped out. NLL Live crapped out at the worst possible time, basically, of the season. So I'm hoping that they're going to spend the entire off-season upgrading that, fixing that, figuring out what's wrong with it, stress testing the living crap out of it. They really need to make sure that that's bulletproof. Because when you're watching games on Major League Baseball feeds or hockey feeds or NFL feeds, I mean, God forbid that any of those go down, because they've got thousands and thousands and thousands of people paying for it, and they will not let it go down. There is no way. So there's ways to do it.
Drives the MLB is basically what HBO decided to use. So there's a small team of MLB Digital that when HBO decided to start streaming shows, they just contracted with those guys and said, "You do it right, we'll do it that way." I imagine it'll cost more than what the league would be willing to pay for it, but they're charging me money and they're giving me a terrible product. And so where's my encouragement to do it again next year?
Yeah, all this kind of reminds me of when everybody was going through B2 and you were paying by the game, and half the time you were getting a refund or a credit for another game because the feed was so crappy. Like, I'm disappointed because I didn't get to watch very many of the games this season, but all the complaints I've heard, yeah, if it's anything like this next season, I won't do it again. As much as it kind of sucks for me, it just sounds like such a headache.
Yeah.
And I know the beginning of the season, everybody was complaining. So it's definitely been an ongoing issue they really need to take a look at. Because I would have loved to have seen this game too, but of course this one was on NL Live only, and so can't watch it.
So I guess that ends our rant on NL Live. Hopefully we'll get a better solution to that next year, whether they go back to YouTube or whether they fix this or something. But on a related note, I don't know what the deal is about streaming playoff games. I don't think there's been any announcement from the league as to whether Universal will be involved or whether TSN Go will be involved or whether they're all on NL Live or something else. But they don't have a lot of time to get that announcement out because there's games in 6 days. So they'll have to get that announcement out pretty soon, I would imagine. On to the game itself. I guess we should probably talk about that. This was a really entertaining game. It started off all stealth. They scored the first 4 goals. I thought the offense looked really good, and we've talked a number of times this season about having 2 different stealth teams. The one that is, plays really well and looks like they have it all together, and the other one that's really inconsistent and doesn't know what the heck they're doing. And we seem to have seen more of the second stealth than the first this season. But we certainly saw the first team for the majority of this game anyway. It looked more like this was the good stealth team, this was the good Roughnecks team. The Roughnecks team just happened to win. It wasn't so much that the stealth just lost it. That said, they played really well in the first half. The Roughnecks played really well and slightly better in the second half. I thought Tyler Richards had a really good game. The stealth offense was all over the place. Dutch had 6 goals. Corey Small played well. Logan Schuss played well. Ilya Gaich had 4 assists. Tyler Digby had 3 goals. So it was all over the place. That was pretty good. Calgary had kind of the same. Jeff Shatler had 4 goals and 4 assists. Evans had 3 goals and 4 assists. Dixon was 1 and 5. The big difference in the game was shots. Calgary had 65 shots on Richards. Vancouver only managed 46. Considering the goal difference was only 1, Vancouver could have gotten another 10, 15 shots in there. We might have been looking at quite a different outcome. And one thing that Brad Challoner mentioned on the broadcast, now he said Calgary had 0 penalties in this game. And what he meant by that was Calgary had no penalties that weren't offset by a Vancouver penalty at the same time. So Vancouver had no power plays at all in this game. Calgary only ended up with 2 penalties in the whole game. So that's pretty disciplined, so good on Calgary for that. But yeah, I mean, like I said, very entertaining game. Would have been nice to have seen the whole thing. But congratulations to Calgary for pulling it out, considering their start, the fact that they're a playoff team now, and now they're tied with Edmonton and Colorado in the West. That's they can put that whole crappy start thing behind them now that they've made the playoffs. Tyler, I imagine you watched this one.
Yes, I may or may not have watched the first half of the first quarter while driving home in my car, but it's just line of sight. It was fine. Great start. I'm glad I got to see that start. Stealth had 4 goals in the first, before the first TV timeout. After the third, you could hear Jake Elliott say Carson Young went down with a hamstring injury, and Jake Elliott calls it and says, Molaski just pointed at Young to go down. Like, absolutely faked the injury, got the Canadian timeout, and it's something that the league purposely had put rules in around. And you take one of the youngest, most fit athlete transition players on the Roughnecks, and he goes down that quickly with a hamstring injury. I think the refs can't just say you're lying, but I don't know what the proper response is to do there. It didn't actually stop the flow. Stealth got another goal shortly after that, but it was definitely an act not in the spirit of the game. So that kind of I didn't like. The shot differential is the thing that blows my mind the most. 20 less shots, 19 less shots by Vancouver. They lost the game in that scenario alone. Everything else was looking really good for them. Joel McCready was actually quiet compared to what he has when he's usually stepping up when the rest of the team is struggling, but everybody was in a groove, so he just kind of went off and did his grinding for loose balls and setting picks, and wasn't a focal point of the scoring that they needed to have, and almost worked out. If he would have got one or two more, would have made a difference, I guess. Reese Dutch had a huge second half. He refused to let the team lose. He had a bunch of goals in the fourth quarter, just constantly fighting back. Never. I think by that point they were kind of continually coming back versus trying to hold on to a lead. So, Graham, have you done your Moneyball points? I imagine his tying goals are not worth as much as a leading goal would be. How do you do it in this game?
He had 3.5. He had one tying goal in the fourth and
Yeah.
one go-ahead goal. Actually,
Okay.
the first goal of the game, so that would have been the
Okay.
go-ahead goal.
Yeah. So yeah, he was constantly making moves to not let the Stealth and the season end. But just it wasn't quite enough. Jeff Shatler played like the former MVP that he is, huge in the fourth quarter with that game-winning goal late in the game. Just didn't quite work out. The Stealth even drew up a play with, 30 seconds left, got the ball, and had a pretty good look, and just couldn't quite beat Chiliano to tie it up and go to OT. I think if they would have gone to OT, they would have had a good chance. They had a good crowd in Langley, over 4,000, which doesn't sound huge, but for them it is, and it can make a difference. They were loud, and I think they kind of a bummer that they couldn't pull that kind of crowd all the time, but they did this time. They gave them a good game, but now the people are just going to forget about it for 9 months or 8 months. Sad end of the season. I mean, they had probably like a 3-game lead in the division after 6 games were played when Calgary was 0-6, and so they had 12 games to go. And if you saw a baseball team lose that kind of lead with 10 or 12 games to go, it'd kind of be newsworthy. I think this is would be newsworthy if we were a bigger sport to see such a huge comeback by the Roughnecks to get out of the basement and make the playoffs like they have. And then, my other comment was around the video feed, but I already chimed in when you did. So that sums up my thoughts on the game, and the game kind of reflected the Stealth season, I would say. They had some great moments, but it was never enough to turn it into something to write home about. It's like, yeah, we had great moments, but we didn't make the playoffs. We didn't even finish like not the worst team in the league, and or the worst team in the division. And I don't know. We got to see what happens this summer. I think they have some great pieces. They have locked up some good lefty shooters. They need somebody to go inside on the left-hand side, like McCready does from the right, which, as I was thinking about that, is what Johnny Palace, he would do that in Rochester. Like, Jameson would sit on the outside and Vitarelli would sit on the outside, and Palace would kind of set picks, and they would dump passes to him in on the crease, and now the Stealth don't have Palace, and that's the piece that's missing from the offense. It's kind of cruel. So, yeah, that's my thoughts there.
Melissa, how about you? Did you see this one?
No,
Yeah,
did not see
on
this one.
live, wasn't it?
It was definitely when we were watching, what we could of the live feed, the live score feed, but it is like Tyler just said. It's really kind of crazy to watch what's happened with these two teams over the season because what we saw towards the end is not how it looked at the beginning, and so to see Calgary basically kind of sneak in, and I guess it's kind of hard to say that they really snuck in. I mean, Colorado is only a couple games above everybody, so it's not like there was that wide of a gap. So it's definitely sad to see Vancouver out of it again. But what are you gonna do? We need more teams.
Well, it was interesting, Tyler, when you said this was kind of a season. It was kind of representative of the stealth season because it was kind of representative of the Roughnecks season as well, and that they started really slow, down 4 goals before 5 minutes were up.
Totally.
And then they just kept pecking away, and before you know it, they're on top. Okay, so on to our predictions of the week. And we have our final stats for the season as well. I was 4-1. I only missed the Rochester, Minnesota game, which Tyler obviously had the foresight to pick correctly. So I was 4-1. Tyler was 2-3, and Melissa was 3-2. Overall, I ended up the season at 50-31, which is a 61.7% correctness ratio, I suppose. Tyler was 45-36, which is 55.6%, and Melissa was our winner at 51-30, which is 63%. So all three of us were better than chance, better than flipping a coin. So there's a testament to our expert lacrosse knowledge.
Vegas. I got covered. Even if it's worse than the three of us, I'm good to go.
Of course, our expert lacrosse knowledge wasn't as good as last year for a couple of us. Last year I was 58-23, so I'm down 8 games from last year. Tyler was 54-27, so he's down 9. Melissa's the big winner here. She was a very respectable 48-33 last year and gained 3 games. So good job, Melissa, considering you weren't able to see a lot of the games because they were on NLL Live.
Yeah, it was kind of strange having to rely more on records and just what I did know. maybe it was a good thing.
So we have our predictions for next week's games. There's only a couple. First round of the playoffs. And then we will get into the predictions that we made at the beginning of the season for the final standings, as well as the weekly or the yearly awards, and we'll go over what we thought at the beginning of the season and how close we were or weren't, as the case may be. Round 1 of the playoffs consists of a grand total of 2 games: Buffalo playing in Rochester and Calgary playing in Colorado, and I don't know the dates of either of them, whether they're Friday night or Saturday night. Hoping they're Friday night or Saturday night because these Sunday evening games are a pain in the butt for me, considering I have to get this Moneyballers article done by Monday. So I tend to do that Sunday mornings. So I'm hoping for Friday or Saturday games. I'll go first with my picks. Shouldn't take long because there's only a couple. Buffalo, Rochester. I was going to say this was a tough one, but quite honestly, they were both kind of difficult. I wasn't sure where to go. And we talked about this before the show as well, what kind of a role Buffalo is on right now. They won their last 4. They won their last 3 by 8, 11, and 10 goals. Granted, they were against Vancouver and 2 against New England, so non-playoff teams. But like we said, they just did not take their foot off the gas. And 4 big wins. Ryan Benesch got the winning goal in 3 of them. I think they're going into the playoffs with a ton of confidence, and their goal scoring top 3, obviously Benesch, Dane Smith, and Mark Stainhouse. You'd be hard pressed to find a better top 3 on any team. So I'm going to pick Buffalo in this one and think they might take out the defending champion Nighthawks in that game. and then they come to Toronto, and I'm not especially looking forward to facing them in Toronto. So I kind of hope I get that one wrong and Rochester takes them out. But I'm going to pick Buffalo. Calgary, Colorado. The whole 0-6 thing for Calgary is now gone. They're tied with everybody else. And they're kind of entering the playoffs on a high as well after last night's game. And I can see them riding that to a victory over the Mammoth. As you've said before, Melissa, Calgary has kind of been your nemesis in the playoffs, and I can kind of see that happening again. So I'm going to pick Calgary in this one. Melissa, what do you think?
I would agree. These were tough to pick because, as we said, everybody starts back at 0. You have a clean slate, and so what you were doing these last few games has more weight, really, than how you started off the season. I am going to go with Rochester over Buffalo, and I think part of that is the fact that overall Rochester has had some tougher opponents. But I would actually kind of like to see Buffalo go. I'm kind of tired of seeing Rochester in there. I want to see some new blood. But I could see this one going either way. I could see this one going to overtime. So I really am looking forward to watching this one. But I think Rochester is just maybe a little bit on their side with Vince. With Calgary and Colorado, the game actually is Saturday. There is one benefit to the Avs being out of the playoffs, at least for the Mammoth. I'm going to pick Calgary. I would love to say, oh yeah, and be a homer and be like, yeah, my team has this. I just can't feel that way. Even going against Calgary, that you really don't know what to expect with them. Colorado has had some moments of brilliance this season, but Calgary has been their bane. They really have. They've knocked them out almost every playoff game that we've played against them. I think the Stealth knocked us out twice, maybe. But all the rest of them have practically been Calgary. So Calgary coming to Colorado, they love to come to Colorado. So for them to come in strong after a win, Mammoth coming in after a loss, home field advantage for the Mammoth isn't what it was. And so that almost puts more pressure on them, and they almost play worse at home. So there's just a lot of factors going in there, and depending on if they start Ward and switch to Bouquet, or if they start off Bouquet, it could have a huge impact right off the start. And if they play anything like they did last night, Calgary's going to walk away with it. So I'll go with Calgary. What about you, Tyler?
Trying to figure out if my cat wants to make a pick here or not. But the first game, I wonder if we're going to see the playoff Rochester team show up. The first year they won the title, they were a low seed, not even number 2 seed, and they just got on a roll and showed up in the playoffs. But this year I haven't seen that spark from them. They've been a little inconsistent, and Buffalo is absolutely on a tear right now. I think they're even beyond a roll. They're just flying through people, putting up 20 goals a game. They're super hot, and I want to see them knock off the champs. So I'm picking Buffalo to win that game. And then the second game, Calgary shows up in playoffs against Colorado really well. But I think the season series at least split. Colorado definitely can beat them. The home field advantage is interesting as I'm thinking about the first round of playoff games are usually the worst attended games of the season. Like you have 1 week's notice. Even though they had 2 because they knew they were a number 2 seed for a little while now, so they've had more than the 1 week notice. But it's hard to get people to show up for those first round of playoff games because it's not the big championship game, and they kind of have already gone to a bunch of games, 9 already, and maybe they wanted a break from it, depending on their enthusiasm level. But all those things, I don't know, won't matter in my mind, as Colorado has a good team. Maybe not the playoff experience that the Roughnecks have, but they have a good team, and I'm picking Colorado to win this. Kind of feels like it'd be an upset if they do, even though they're the higher seeded team. But I can see them pulling this win off. All right, Graham, back to you.
All right, and just for completeness, we will take a look at the matchups. Melissa, you mentioned that Calgary has been your bane in the playoffs, so I wanted to see what that was like. And Calgary against Colorado all time in the playoffs is 6-1, 4-0 at home, and 2-1. Does that make sense? Yes, 2-1 in Colorado. But overall, including the regular season, they're only 8-10 in Colorado, and 14-9 at home. So if you play them, I guess you kind of want to play them at home. So you do have that advantage. But like I said, they're 6-1 against the Mammoth in the playoffs overall. The other matchup is low against Rochester. Rochester owns that playoff series 7-4 all time. 5-1. They are 5-1 against Buffalo in the playoffs at home, and 2-3 in Buffalo. And this one is in Rochester, so I guess Rochester owns the advantage on that one. Okay, so our final segment for this show will be our predictions from the beginning of the season, and let's see what we came up with at the beginning of the year. My standings were, what did I say? Rochester first, Buffalo second, Toronto third, Minnesota fourth, and New England fifth in the East. So I got Minnesota and New England correct. In the West, I had Calgary, Edmonton, Colorado, and Vancouver. So I got Vancouver right. So that's 3 right out of 9. Not so bad. Tyler, you had Rochester first, Buffalo second, Toronto third, New England fourth, and Minnesota fifth. So you kind of had it right in that you had the first 3 playoff teams correct in the wrong order, and then you had the 2 non-playoff teams correct in the wrong order. So 0 right there. In the West, you had Calgary, Vancouver, Colorado, and Edmonton, which is almost exactly backwards.
Nobody told me Keenan was coming back after 3 weeks.
Fair enough. Melissa, you had Toronto correct, New England not so much, Buffalo correct, and then Rochester and Minnesota. So 2 right in the East. Calgary in the West. In the West you had Calgary, and then Edmonton, and then Colorado and Vancouver. So you had Vancouver right in the West, and that gave you 3 correct out of 9.
It kind of makes me wonder how different my picks might have been, because if you remember, we actually did do these after the first game, because it kind of snuck up on all of us, and we really hadn't done them in advance. So I had at least watched some of the first game. So yeah, I was so impressed with how New England came out. I was like, yeah, they're gonna rip it up this season. Boy, was I wrong.
That was after the Bandits the Black Wolves had beaten the Bandits 12-8, and I guess if we had seen them after week 2, we might have all agreed that New England was going to have a great season after they beat the Rochester Nighthawks 17-7. That was half of their wins in the season right there, so not so much. Awards. These ones are a little more interesting because I guess most of this was based on last year, not so much the preseason and such. MVP, I went for Dan Dawson, and I guess Dawson had a decent year. I don't remember anybody talking about him in the MVP votes. In fact, I don't remember hearing anybody talking about Cody Jamieson in the MVP votes either. Tyler, you went with Jammer, and Melissa, I can call you the winner on this one, is you went with Mark Matthews. And I think last week when we talked about our MVP votes, all of us picked Matthews either first or second, so you kind of got that one right.
It's okay, I totally bombed the next one.
Goaltender of the year. I guess I'll call myself the winner on this one, Aaron Bold, which we all picked either first or second again. Tyler, you went with Tyler Richards, just because the first name, I imagine. And Melissa went with Evan Kirk, who, again, seemed to look like he was going to have a pretty good season at the beginning, and then that didn't seem to follow. Now, just taking a quick glance over the scores here, Black Wolves, I guess they didn't get blown out an awful lot. They had the last 3 games they gave up 20 goals twice. but they held the Rock to only 10. Most of their games are in the 11, 12, 13 range, so they weren't giving up 15, 16, 17 goals against every week. So perhaps it wasn't so much Kirk's fault as in the fault that they couldn't score goals. Defensive player, we had a couple of votes for Kyle Rubisch, who, if you don't watch any of the games, is probably a decent choice for Defensive Player of the Year. And Melissa went for Steve Priolo, who was a pretty decent choice as well. But yeah, so I think Priolo had a pretty decent year, and he's changed a lot in the last few years. I remember watching him in a Rock game several years ago. Bandits against the Rock, and he just looked like a pylon. He looked like a fighter who happened to own a lacrosse stick and didn't really know what he was doing in the game. Now maybe he just had a bad game, but in the couple of years since then, he's turned into. He will certainly, is a big physical guy who will drop the mitts if necessary, but he's a good lacrosse player as well. So, Transition Player of the Year, all three of us voted for Jeremy Thompson. And Thompson had a decent year, but I think we all talked about Joey Capito as being a pretty decent choice as Transition Player for this year. Thompson's face-off numbers were down quite a bit this year, as were Bob Snyder's. I don't know what happened to him, but he was under 50% this year. And with a name like Snyder, you can't be down at 50%, I don't think.
He didn't even play this weekend. So
no, he missed the last couple of games, I think, didn't he? Rookie of the Year, again, a clean sweep. We all went for Miles Thompson. Maybe we fell victim to the hype that Minnesota tried to get around Thompson, and that's their job. That's what they need to do. Whereas the Rush didn't say an awful lot about Ben McIntosh, but I think we all agree that McIntosh is probably the better choice for Rookie of the Year. Les Bartley Award. Tyler and I went for Kurt Malowski. Melissa went for Dan Perreault. Perreault doesn't seem like all that good of a choice at this point. Malowski certainly didn't seem like a great choice for the first half of the season, but the fact that he got his team behind him and the team never gave up despite how they started and managed to get into the playoffs makes him at least a candidate for the Les Bartley Award, I would think. And finally, GM of the Year, I went with Terry Sanderson, who is still my vote. Tyler went for Doug Locker, and Melissa went for Mike Bolt. So a couple more picks for Western teams who I'm not sure either of those really would qualify as great GM of the Year candidates, given how their seasons went. Any other comments from our picks for the year?
I think picking the GM is the hardest no matter what. Just picking the GM is difficult because they have an impact. But I mean, Steve Govett's really the only one that I have that much familiarity with what he kind of does, and he's great. That he brings in so many great players, but beyond that we struggle. So it's like, how much weight do you really put on what he did in the beginning of the season? So I always find that one just the hardest to pick. It's almost like, let me draw a name out of a hat. So.
Yeah, the GM pick, early on I was definitely picking Locker because the Stealth didn't make the playoffs last year, and so they made moves to correct that. And getting Palace was a big move and turned out to completely fail. But he also turned Palace into Logan Schuss, which is a great pick. So in as far as addressing a left-handed shooter. But again, they didn't make the playoffs. I still like the moves he made. I think they had a lot of injury issues. The defense never played together. Like last night's defense playing against the Roughnecks, the only time they played together before this, that same group, was the season opening game. 18 games, 16 games in between, but 17, whatever. It doesn't matter. They had no continuity about building a team out on the back end or at any spot on the floor almost, battling those injuries. Other than that, Jeremy Thompson definitely faded away. Jay Thornbear is probably, I think I picked Thornbear probably last week, but he definitely is the new hotness on faceoffs and being in the middle of the field. I don't know if people got game film on Thompson were able to address it, or if he played tons of games. He played World Championships, and maybe he's just a little fatigued and needs a little downtime to recharge next fall. We'll see.
I'd kind of agree with that. There might just have been more intel on him because, Graham, you said that he was kind of hyped up, but it's like the hype was warranted. I mean, we all knew who he was coming into the season, and for one, I rarely know who's coming into the draft classes. It's just not something I follow. So when even I, who really don't pay any attention to it, know about Miles Thompson, and I know he's coming into the draft, I think everybody's expectations were pretty high. So I think it was natural that we all would have been like, oh yeah, he has it. But Ben McIntosh has just really come kind of out of nowhere and done well. So good to see that.
All right, and Tyler, you did make a good point about Doug Locker. He did make some moves to address the problems that the Stealth had. Bringing in Palace was a big one. And it is hard to blame him for the fact that experiment didn't really work. Nobody at the time thought, okay, well, that was a dumb idea. I think I mentioned in one of my earlier postings on my blog that I didn't think Palace was going to end up being the superstar that they were hyping him up as, but I didn't think it would. I thought he'd have a better season than he did. But like you said, he then turned Palace into Logan Chess, and that was a good move as well. So yeah, it is hard to blame Locker for the fact that those experiments didn't work out, because nobody really thought they wouldn't work out. Yeah, so I guess that will be it for our predictions, and in some cases we seem to do okay, in other cases we failed miserably, but that's the way it goes. I guess that'll be it for our final regular season episode. We'll be back in the playoffs, of course. AddictedToLacrosse.com, where you will find all of our old episodes. If you want to get a hold of us and let us know what you think about the show, Lax Podcast on Twitter is probably the best way, or you can email us at feedback@addictedtolacrosse.com. We're on Facebook as well, facebook.com/laxpodcast. So hit us up there. If you have any questions or comments, let us know what you like, let us know what you don't like, and help us make the show better. That's about it for this week. This has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For Tyler and Melissa and Tyler's cat, I'm Graham. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week.